But today we are flipping on to chapter 9. We've gone through 8 chapters already, 8 chapters in 3 years actually. And since January this year, we've been on chapter 8. But last week, we wrapped up the last part of that. And today we're moving on to the beginning of chapter 9. And today's title is actually quite interesting, especially for us as Liverpool people. The title is Walk On, You Will Never Walk Alone. Actually, it's just Walk On, but I added You Will Never Walk Alone because I'm a Liverpool fan. And it speaks directly into that theme, as you're going to see. So it's Esther chapter 9, verse 1 and verse 2. It says, so on the 28th day of February, the day the 2 decrees of the king were to be put into effect, the day the Jews' enemies had hoped to vanquish them, though it turned out quite to the contrary. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the king's provinces to defend themselves against any who might try to harm them, but no one tried, for they were greatly feared. The Lord bless his word in Jesus' name. Amen. As a way of quick, these are the 2 reflection questions at the end, but I want us to take note of them. The first one says, have you ever had fearful situations from which God miraculously delivered you? If there is time at the end, we'll come back to that and have 1 or 2 people share what that looked like for them. And the second one is, can you mention 3 biblical examples of great divine deliverance? And the Bible is filled of stories of deliverances, as we're going to see. But before we take maybe 1 or 2 contributions on that, here's just a quick recap to help us track what we've done so far. So in chapter 1, we met this king by the name of Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, depending on the version that you're using, who is very unpredictable and very, just an interesting king, the kind of king that would throw a party for 187 days. And we met the wife, Vashti, who refused the summons of the king and got deposed. So in chapter 2, we're introduced to Esther, who won the beauty contest for a replacement for Vashti, basically. And we also were introduced to Mordecai, who did something quite interesting towards the end of chapter 2 that saved the king's life. He found out some people were planning to assassinate the king, and he exposed to that. And in chapter 3, we were introduced to yet another new character by the name of Haman, who was not so happy with Mordecai, and because of his hatred for Mordecai, decided to do something that would not only touch Mordecai, but touch everyone from Mordecai's lineage. And so he was out against the Jews, and he had a plot for all the Jewish people to be assassinated. In chapter 4, we saw how Mordecai urged Esther to stand up on behalf of the Jews and see what she can do in her power to thwart the plans of Mordecai. And that was where we got that phrase, if I perish, I perish. And she audaciously decided to go and meet with the king. In chapter 5, we saw how Esther met with the king, obtained favor, and eventually got to convince the king to come and have a dinner or have some sort of banquet with her, in which she requested for yet another banquet. Now, in chapter 6, before the second banquet, in between the first and the second, we learned that the king could not sleep. And so while they were reading the chronicles of what has happened to him, he heard about what Mordecai did and decided to reward him. You remember the story and how everything just dramatically turned from there. And in chapter 7, Mordecai eventually Haman met his end, and he was hung on the same pole that he had planned to hang Mordecai upon. And then in verse 8, it was all about trying to undo the thing that Haman had done, which is almost impossible because the laws of Persia are always like binding. And so there was a new law that empowered the Jewish people to defend themselves on the day that was supposed to be the day for that battle. And that's where we are now in chapter 9, the day that has been assigned to be the day that all the Jewish people were to be massacred, turned out to be a day, according to those 2 verses that we read, where quite to the contrary happened. And that's just like a summary of all the things that the story that we've journeyed through so far covers. So in this particular chapter, basically, we turn to chapter 9, beginning with this, the day that the Jews' enemies had hoped to vanquish them, though it turned out quite to the contrary, just like I said. How do you handle circumstances in life when the odds are against you? 3 chapters ago, it didn't look like chapter 9 was going to look like chapter 9 was looking like. Of course, we can sit down and read the whole book of Esther in a sitting, but this is actually spanned years. Between chapter 2 and chapter 6 is like 5-year period. And of course, between chapters 5 and 7, everything happened within 48 hours. So there are places where it just looks like it was happening as it is written. There are other places that many other things had happened for years that we didn't know about. And so we can look at that and we know the end of the story. But put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in the shoes of the Jewish people. In chapter 4, when they heard about the fact that Haman had signed a law together with the king to wipe them off. And there was nothing in sight that looks like there will be a chapter 9, whereby the reverse of what they thought was going to happen eventually happened. That's where the theme of deliverance comes from. So I'll go back to that introductory question, the second one, and say, can one or two people mention from the Bible stories of deliverances that stands out to you, just as a way of reminding us that we serve a God that delivers us? So any contributions in that regard, you can shoot up your fingers and I would unmute you from here, or you can unmute yourself and give the contribution. Yes, sir, Heather Gwena. You are unmuted already.
Okay. In the Bible, David was delivered so many times by God. He was delivered from the hand of Saul. Many times he tried to kill David. He threw the arrow on David, and David escaped. He used his army to go and arrest David and kill David. But David, in all of them, in all his attempts, he failed. So that's what I want to say of God's deliverance.
Thank you very much, sir. That's a very good example. Any other example that comes to mind from someone else?
God. Praise God.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. The other one is, I think there are loads of them.
Sure.
One of them is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were delivered by God from the fiery furnace set up by Nebuchadnezzar in the kingdom of Babylon, and that's another great deliverance there.
Beautiful. I'll take one more.
Another one is Daniel.
Yeah.
Lions den. When God delivered him, they put him there for the lion to eat him up. But at the end of the day, God closed the mouth of the lion and nothing happened to Daniel.
Beautiful, beautiful. The Bible is filled, like we said, of stories like that, right from Genesis down to the very end. So while we've shared that, I also want us to, at the back of our minds, begin to think about in your own life, in my own life, and hopefully we'll be able to have one or two people share in that regard towards the end for the personal reflection of in your own life, when has been a moment when you're faced with danger and it looks like there's no way out, but God came through and delivered you. It will be very inspiring to hear one or two stories if you are comfortable to share along those lines. Okay, so so we want to look at some of the odds that was actually against these Jewish people in the context that we are considering here and see how God came through for them. So the first is the fact that the Persians greatly outnumbered them. At this time, historically, if we are tracing it along the lines of the timeline of the events of the Bible, actually by this time, many of the Israelites or Jewish people are beginning to return to Jerusalem. But a good number of them are still scattered in different places, especially in the province of Persia, where they were held captive before. So it's not like there were so very many of them. A good number of them had returned to Jerusalem, but some of them were still in captivity. So the Persians, by all means, outnumbered them. The second odd against them is the fact that they were insignificant. They were what you could call in our context now, in the multicultural context of UK, you could call them the ethnic minorities. They were the minorities in many regards, both in terms of how they were reckoned in the society and and how they were treated and things like that. So it's very easy, so to speak, logically speaking, going by the facts, to effect what the law had said, the edict that they should be wiped out. It's very easy to effect that because there were not so many and they were insignificant in terms of the climes of the times. And the third is the fact that Persian laws are unchangeable, just like we saw. Whatever has been signed into law, they believe is binding and irreversible, which is why the only way out that the king could devise, in fact, the king got to throw it back to Mordecai and Esther to think of whatever way they think they could counter the law that Haman had enabled, as it were, before his demise. And that was why the only reasonable thing to think of is to say, okay, now there is a new law saying Jewish people should empower themselves, fight and defend yourselves against whoever would come against you. And when I read that imaginatively, I'm still wondering how the Jewish people really felt. Towards the end of chapter 7, we read that they were happy when they heard that. But for me, if I was living in that sense or in that context, I'm wondering, will I actually still be joyful? Because it's not that the battle was not going to happen. The date is still in the future. The people were still supposed to come against them. But they were already rejoicing and happy perhaps because of what they know in terms of their covenant relationship with God. So what was the initial reaction to those hordes? The initial reaction was that the Persians hoped to vanquish the Jews, just like we saw from verse 1 and chapter 9. They were certain that they were going to have the upper hand. Naturally, of course, the Jews were afraid. It was because they were afraid that in chapter 4, Mordecai had to come. In fact, the Bible says he cried like a baby, basically. He came to the palace, tore his clothes, mourned the way they would mourn in their cultural understanding, and then sent messages to Esther to see whatever she could do to bring or to be an agent of deliverance. So naturally, they were afraid. It's not like they were so confident that everything was going to work out well in the end. But that was their initial response. Even Esther herself was afraid. Because again, she can't just go into the king, the same king that had not seen her for a month at the time, I think. And if she goes in uninvited, there are laws about that as well. That if the king decides not to stretch forth his scepter towards you, then you are gone. So in very many regards, their initial reaction was that of fear, that of anxiety, but again also that of courage, as Esther eventually decided to take the step, asked them to pray, herself prayed, they fasted for 3 days, and then she was able to go into the king. And what was the eventual reaction to those odds is the fact that the tables were turned. Now we saw that the Persians were afraid. In fact, at the end of chapter 7, we learned that some of them were turning over to become Jewish people. And I don't know how that happened or what that would have looked like. But the point is, at the end of the day, the Jewish people prevailed. They prevailed over their quote-unquote enemies. And so the big question really for us is what changed? What changed in that story? It's the unseen hand of God. That's the overall theme of what we've been studying, by the way, in the book of Esther. The fact that God was not mentioned throughout this book, the fact that God was busy doing things, even though he's not visibly mentioned or visibly seen, as it were, especially in the text. At the end of the day, all that matters is this: on whose side is God? For every battle of life, for every storm of life, for every challenge that we will ever go through in life, the question that matters to us at the end of the day is, on which side is God? Is he on your side, or is he on the side of the challenge? Or is he on the side of, quote unquote, the enemy? Is he on the side of whatever it is that is coming against you? Because we can be fully and truly persuaded that whichever side God is on is going to be the side that wins. The Bible says categorically in Romans 8:31. So what do you think? With God on our side like this, how can we lose? In the King James Version, it says, if God be for us, who can be against us? It's a rhetorical question. And the answer is very obvious. If God, the Almighty, all-seeing, all-knowing, all-wise God, is on our own side, then we can rest knowing that he can assure us, not even he can, he has assured us of the victory, and victory will be ours. So it comes down to, finally, our choice. The very day that we fear, whatever that day may be, for them it was the 12th day in the month of Adar. Whatever day that might be, for some is the day of the surgery, for some is the day of the delivery pregnancy. Whatever day it is in the future, in the nearest future or distant future that we may fear, it could actually be the day of divine deliverance as it was for the Israelites. Or it could be a day of humiliation as they rightly feared. So for instance, if they continued to fear and decide not to have taken the same decisions that they took in chapter 4, the story wouldn't have turned out as it had turned out eventually in chapter 9. So the outcome, however, will be decided by where our focus lies. Are you going to focus on the odds that are against you, or are you going to focus on the one that is on your side? And the Bible makes it clear that one with God is a majority. So in conclusion, however darkly the month of Adar may loom, and that's month of Adar proverbially speaking, in the distance, let us move on towards it. And this is directly from the syllabus. Let's move on towards it, encouraging ourselves in the Lord our God. Hope on, hope always. Above all things, do not indulge in apprehensions, for it is injurious to your nature and strength sapping. It will sap your strength if you continue to live in anxiety. Just keep on going, keep on moving towards the day, knowing that there is someone with you. Hebrews 3:12 puts this in perspective. It says, search your hearts every day, my brothers and sisters, and make sure that none of you has evil or unbelief hiding within you. For unbelief will lead you astray and make you unresponsive to the living God. In other words, God is always ready to help, even though it might be unseen. His hand might be unseen, but he's ready to stand and fight on your behalf. But you can become unresponsive to that by the posture of your heart. If you choose to line up with doubt, if you choose to line up with unbelief, then you are going to reap the harvest of that. But if you choose to focus looking unto Jesus, the Bible says in Hebrews 12, the author and the finisher of our faith, then we get what he has assured that we're going to get, which is victory. We're more than conquerors through him who loved us. So lastly, back to where we started, and this is where we're wrapping up. If there is anybody that if you've ever had a fearful situation from which God miraculously delivered you, and you can share it in a few seconds, it's not going to take so much time, I'll be happy to hear one or two stories from us. Anybody willing to go for that? Yes, sir. Edagwena.
Yes, it was many years ago when I was working as an agent for a credit company. I went into a house to pick up money from a client. And the Spirit of God just spoke to me. I heard God's voice, not in my ears, but in my spirit, in my soul. And the voice said to me, move out now, move out now. It was a fearful situation. For God to say, move out now, move out of this place. Immediately, I did not wait to hear God, that voice the second time. I quickly moved out. As I was going out, as I moved out of the house and was moving, I turned back and I saw the woman coming after me with a knife in her hand. I turned back and said, do you want to stab me? She dropped the gun, she dropped the knife and slapped me. So that was God delivering me. It was a fearful situation, because if it's not for God, I would have been dead and gone by now. But that was God delivering me from that fearful situation. Praise the Lord.
Hallelujah. Thank you very much for that example. Our time is fast spent. Is there one more person that would like to share? If you can share in 30 seconds. Okay, I'll just take the conclusion. But I think we got the point and the message. It's at the end of the day, it is God with whom we have to do. When you walk through, and this conclusion is actually the lyrics of the popular Liverpool FC anthem, you will never walk alone. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark at the end of the storm. There is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark Walk on through the wind. Walk on through the rain. Though your dreams be tossed and blown, walk on with hope in your heart, and you never walk alone. You would never walk alone. Time will not permit me to begin to link it up with the scriptural references that we've put on, but I think that song goes beyond the realms of football to speak very much into the affairs of our daily lives. Walk on with that courage, with that confidence, knowing that you are not walking alone, you are walking with He that is in you, who is greater than he that is in the world. And may the Lord bless his words in our hearts in Jesus' name.